At the Results Operations Centre in Midrand. We hope that you can see us well and hear us well. For more commentary on this election period, I'm joined in studio by political analyst Dr. Dale McKinley. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us. My pleasure. So what's your sense of how the special voting session has gone thus far? We're on the second and final day. The IEC saying, yes, there have been one or two minor issues here and there. But of course, we've been hearing stories and we've been reporting stories on elderly people having to wait hours, until they were able to vote. Some IEC officials not pitching up to where they were scheduled to pitch up for people to exercise their special votes. Some minor protests here and there in Gauteng and parts of Eastern Cape, even not enough stationery for ballot stations such that they opened late. I mean, it's quite a lot, but what are your thoughts around how things have gone thus far?
I think it's a mixed bag. I think that these things should not happen, let's be honest. We've had plenty of time to prepare. The IEC's had a lot of time, and yes, they're minor in the larger sense of the term, but it's people who are exercising their right to vote, and they shouldn't have to, particularly elderly people, shouldn't have to wait that long, shouldn't have to be questioning whether or not they are going to be able to do their special voting, early voting. So I think in this case, the IEC's preparations were generally good, but there's clearly some gaps that they have here in relation to their logistics and their planning. And it's always going to be, I think, there's over 5,000 to 7,000 people that are around, IEC people. So there's always going to be a few that are going to not do their job. Yeah. But I think overall it's okay, it's good. I don't think it brings anything into question. But it's not acceptable in the larger sense of the term, and it needs to be addressed. Yeah,
do better next time, shall we say?
Yeah, absolutely.
And then, of course, earlier I was speaking to Dr. Rinesh Darwaj, our head of research at SABC, and he was highlighting this issue that the IEC has recently changed the rule around where people can vote. They can only vote where they registered to vote, so to speak. So if you're visiting your granny in another province and it's voting day, you can't vote. Yeah. Presumably that's going to cause a lot of problems maybe if those who are willing and able to vote are not able to vote.
Yeah, I remember that this was a debate quite back in the 90s when there was a debate about whether or not you were going to restrict people to voting in where they had registered. And in fact, at that time, people were allowed to vote across the country as a flexibility. And I think it's probably it's not a good policy, generally speaking. It's understandable logistically and for the voters' roll and to make sure everybody is there. But again, this is our sixth, seventh election since 1994. So the IEC this is nothing new to them, and I think they should have allowed it because people are traveling. People might be in different spots. They might be in different places. We allow people overseas. We allow all sorts of other special voting. So why not allow people to vote in other areas? And I think it has to do mostly with the voters' roll and making sure and checking people's names against that roll. And I've also heard a few instances where some of even the special voters didn't find their names on that roll. Yeah. And so these are hiccups that shouldn't really happen. And if any elections, the approach to election should be that everybody should have the maximum opportunity to vote at every single time. And I think that's the principle. Yeah.
In terms of bread and butter issues, unemployment is a massive problem, and all the political parties were campaigning, talking about how they would create lots of jobs. Did you get any sense, were you convinced by any party that they really have a sense of how to begin to deal with the scourge of unemployment?
No, I don't. And I think this is probably why we still have almost 40-something% of our population saying we're not going to vote. And this is a big story still. Irrespective of the fact that this is 30 years from democracy, if one looks at the manifestos and one looks at the policies, it's almost shades of gray in many cases. The outlier is the EFF in some ways, because they have a and if MK to some extent, because there's a nationalization agenda. It's like nationalize everything, centralize it into the state. This is how we're going to drive economic growth. We can debate that and whether or not that's workable. Yeah. But I think other than that, the vast majority of the parties are fairly similar. They all agree pretty much. There's no one out there, and this has been said, that is really representing what you would call an alternative, anti-systemic or we used to have debates about whether capitalism and a free market system and everything was the best. Now we don't have those debates anymore. It's essentially what is the best way of delivering, what's the best way of governing, get rid of corruption, good leaders. So it's a very much of tinkering. It's not about a systemic or overhaul of the engine. And there's no political party I see that is saying that is offering the electorate a real alternative. So to say, for example, how are we going to implement a basic income grant? They say we'd like to implement it, but there's no specifics about how to do that. How are we going to actually implement the National Health Care Initiative, NHI? How are we going to actually do that? Explain it to people. And then they can start seeing that there's economic policies that have meat to that bone. But in this case, I think most political parties have opted for the easy route, which is to sort of just basically talk around the issues.
Big ideas, but lack of detail. Dr. Dale McKinley, thank you very much for your time.